I would like to first express my great sense of delight and privilege in being asked to be here this evening for this celebration. It has already been rewarded by the warmth, the generosity with which so many people greeted me as we sat and had a little bite to eat and to exchange short verse with one another and to make chit-chat, comment, and observations. I got to sense the rhythm of the community in that short moment. And I must say that I delight in your existence. When Frank Ferrari calls, we listen. It is not a remark that is meant just to be witty. It is a remark that is really based in fact. There is much that many of us do in the struggle for human rights and human dignity that is reflected in its success by those who have participated in the process of trying to make the difference. The first time that I came to meet Frank, until this very moment, never once has his engagement been anything less than an honorable and a courageous one in trying to assist in fixing the ills of our world. When one thinks of all the joys and rewards for much that we do, as well as all the pain and the loss that we feel on many an occasion, the one thing that stays constant is that in the face of victories, or in the absence of victories, what makes the journey really worth it are the people whom you meet on the way. Those who share the mission. Those who bring their own courage, their own voice, their own integrity to the causes that we apply ourselves. Such a sharing with Frank has been a great reward for me and many others. I'd like to also express my congratulations to the honoree, Mr. Spies, for the Martin Luther King Award that you gave him. The way in which he responded, what the rabbi said in introducing him, in that tiny moment, it was the embodiment of everything many of us have been striving for to see reflected in the human family and the human experience. A Jew, a rabbi, a leader of his community, honoring a member of his congregation with an award in the name of a black Baptist minister in America is in itself its own miracle. In itself, its own remarkable statement of who we are when we choose to define the best that is in us as the citizens of this nation. The last thing Dr. King ever said to me when we talked to one another face to face, he was in my home, and as had been a routine experience, we were discussing strategy and tactics for the next phase of our struggle. And at this gathering, several of us who were there, we noticed that in Dr. King, that he seemed somewhat distracted and somewhat troubled in his countenance. And at a given moment, I asked him, I said, Martin, you seem to be deeply preoccupied and you seem to be somewhat troubled. Can you share it with us? What is it? And he said, well, I'll tell you, Harry, we fought long and hard to end segregation. Fought long and hard for equal rights. We will come upon our truth. It will be delivered. And in this movement that we call integration, I've come to a place where I now sit with a grave question. And the question is, what do I do with this nagging sense that we are in fact integrating into a burning house? The utterance stilled us all for a moment. Here we were, feeling quite triumphant, having overcome so many obstacles, so much that defied us, and with the strategy and the planning of remarkable men and women of every persuasion. We'd come to a moment when we knew that certain things were inevitable, that we would get the right to vote, that we would have the right to access public places, that we would have the right to equal education. And in the face of all of this sense, this heady moment, for the leader, or one of the most important leaders of the movement, to say to us, as loyal followers, that I'm troubled with the thought that we may be integrating into a burning house, was for us a stunning moment for pause. And I said to him, in the face of such a thought, Martin, what is to be expected of us? And he said, Harry, I think we're just going to have to become firemen. Well, I did not really fully understand how pathetic his remarks were until this very moment in our existence. We sit in one of the darkest moments I have experienced in my 3/4 of a century of life as an American. We sit at a time when our liberties and our freedoms are under the severest attack I've ever known them to be, even inclusive of the period of McCarthyism. The essential difference between this moment and McCarthyism is that there was a rebellion, there was an upheaval, there was a force that understood very early on what was being done to us as a nation. And courageous people rallied to the moment and ended this horror before it could permeate and destroy all in its wake. At this moment of homeland security, laws and rules, at a time when our nation has been so violently and cruelly and consciously misled in our analysis of our policies of governance, in our analysis of our relationship to the world in which we all live, in our analysis in one another. What our government has done to us is to place us at the brink of an abyss from which the great question is, how do we retrieve ourselves from it if there is not an active, courageous response from the citizens of the nation to say, we will not tolerate or accept this design that has been put before us. The great president once said that when the nation comes to a moment when its leadership, its president, those who are responsible for governance, begin to undermine the constitution of this nation, begin to use their power in ways that serve only their ambition and not the honorable needs of its citizens, it is the right and indeed the responsibility of every citizen to rise up in dissent and to protest against that condition. And any citizen who fails to do that should be charged with patriotic treason. I am no stranger to poverty. Poverty was my mother's midwife. Children born to an immigrant woman who came to America, like all immigrants did, with a great sense of hope and an opportunity to participate in the glories and the wonders that this nation had to offer. All that was dashed to the rocks quite swiftly when she understood the special elements that existed in this nation when you were of race. Our European immigrants came and in many instances fulfilled their dreams because they had access to so much. So much was in place for them to call upon, to be able to fulfill the desire to learn, to have skills, to participate in the democratic process. But citizens of color did not quite have it the same way. And as I watched my mother struggle from the perceptions of a child, to see her constantly in battle for her dignity, not only as a person of color, but as a woman and as a mother who was, for all intents and purposes, a single parent, I early on drew from her courage and her strength a sense of defiance against oppression, evil, and through her counsel and her direction, understood that there should be no night that I would lay my head on a pillow and not be able to look back upon a day where I made some contribution to the overthrowing of injustice. It was indelible in my thinking. It was part of my DNA. It's part of what was instilled in me. And why it endured was because the truth of it was so profound and so morally correct that there was no way to deny it, nor was there a desire to do so. This spirit led me to understand that inequities existed, but they did not have to be accepted. That we had the right and the power and the capacity to change things no matter what our station in life was to be, and no matter where we came from. The poorest of us have that power. The most learned of us have that power. Those who are not quite as filled with learning as others are have that power. We all have the resource of soul. And what we do with our souls is the daily challenge to the mission of life. When I came back from the Caribbean, I was born in New York, in Harlem. My mother, who feared for the angers of the streets of the ghetto, took her children back to the Caribbean for safekeeping. And in 1939, at the age of 12, she retrieved us because Hitler and his armies had been rolling through Europe with such omnipotence that she felt that in this attack, in the declaration of war on England, it would be just a few short weeks before the British would capitulate. And that she had no idea what would happen to the colonies, Jamaica being one of them. And so she brought us back to America to be with her and to be in a place that she thought was safer. And upon my return, I remembered her instructing us that we all had a place and we had an obligation to participate in the defeat of this fascist force that unleashed its anger and its devastation on the human family. She took a look at the plight of the Jew and counseled her children that so as the Jews went, so would the rest of us go. And as a matter of fact, from our own perception, since Jews were white, or at least all the ones we knew, if this could happen to white folks, just think what they're going to do when they get to us. We have a very simple, common reason to be a part of the resistance to fascism. And when, for a host of reasons, some of it having to do with failure in school and life and social rhythm, I volunteered for service in the United States Navy. I was smitten with the belief and the commitment that this fight against fascism and for democracy, and all that we were told that the democracies would be, was our struggle and our fight. And that if we could successfully engage the enemy and be victorious, at the end of it all, our rewards would be never-ending. So at the end of the Second World War, having served as a munitions maker in the United States Navy, I came back with the expectations of this democracy, only to find that the white citizens and the citizens of power were not touched by such generosity. We were told that we would have to go back to the conditions of our experience and our past. That we should go back to the conditions that we were traditionally experiencing. That the world would continue to be segregated. That we would be the last to be hired, the first to be fired, the least to be educated, the one to be looked upon most as inhuman, as subspecies. And we would have to endure that while others stood to benefit from the glories of the defeat of fascism and moving on to the new orders of industrial development. And many of us were soon to understand very clearly how serious this intent was when a number of things evidenced themselves. One was a man by the name of Isaac Woodard, one of the greatest soldiers of the Second World War, an African American who served for 4 years in the European theater. And having received the highest honors, coming home, be medaled for all of the courageous things he'd done, Purple Heart, Silver Star, stripes everywhere. He came home proud and ready for the new America and got on a bus from Fort Lee, New Jersey, and was wending his way to his home in South Carolina. And when they passed that imaginary Mason-Dixon line, that line where legal segregation officially started, he was told by the bus driver he had to get into the back of the bus. And he stood and said, "You don't understand, we just fought a war to end all that. There is no more back of the bus. They pulled him from the bus, cruelly beat him with the blunt end of a billy club from the sheriff's hand, gouged out both of his eyes. He recently passed away. He died without dignity, with a great sense of loneliness. And he was a ward of the state. When we experienced that, we understood that we were in for a vigorous and painful, angry time. As those of us who were willing to rebel against this, using whatever means were at our disposal. After all, we just come from war. We've been trained in the most sophisticated techniques of killing. If the indignities that were being imposed upon us, and we were one by one becoming Isaac Woodards, we would take anything that we had to have in order to make sure that even if we did not prevail, those who oppressed us would have no easy time of it. And therefore violence was the code of the day. How fortunate for me that in this time I should have been befriended by a woman named Eleanor Roosevelt. How fortunate for me that she saw in me something that made her reach for me. How fortunate for me that I met a man named Paul Robeson, a man named Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, who were as great educators and as highly educated people, great powers of intellect, that they should have reached into the life of a high school dropout, which I was, and say, we see value in you. Let us have counsel. And how much more rewarding it was when Martin Luther King stepped into my life and said, we have other tools and instruments with which to work. We can defeat this monster that sits in our midst, but we can defeat it only if we are stalwart in the objectives that we shall not become the enemy in our efforts to defeat him. What then is the reward? Where is the victory if we become like him? There is no place for hate. There must be some place here where we find reason. And we must be the ones to not only define how that reasonableness will work, but we must be the executors of it. We must be the firemen. He saw this as a mission for Black America, and I make that racial definition because he made it. He said, because of the nature of our history and our suffering, we had a moral strength and a place from which to see life, that if we used that experience and applied it to the goodness of this nation, we could save the soul of America. We will have to lead the nation to its moral honor. And we did that. It was not just us who were freed. Those in America who were our oppressors were also liberated. Others who had been struggling for a long time in the civil rights movement under our banner found their own courage and their own strength. The women's movement, the environmentalists, ecumenical freedom, all sorts of Native Americans, everyone found their moment. The peace movement, the anti-war movement, everything flourished in America at that moment. And the resonance of that period was carried around the world. Africa heard it, China heard it, Asia, Latin America. What a remarkable thing that in just a few short years, everyone else in the world who watched what went on in this nation was so inspired by what happened, that soon our songs became their songs of freedom. You never heard anything till you've heard "We Shall Overcome" in Chinese. All this was part of the canvas. When Nelson Mandela, in my first moments of corresponding with him while he was in prison, once I understood with clarity what was going on with the apartheid system, how remarkable that he and Archbishop Desmond Tutu and so many others, and all those wonderful Jewish men and women who made up the ANC in South Africa, the large Jewish force that was part of the liberation of South Africa, that all these minds and hearts should have seen in us the hope that nonviolence brought to the struggle for liberation and applied it. And how remarkable that at the ending of that oppression, without one shot being fired, a horror was turned into a dream of delight. For South Africa to have not killed one white person from the hands of black people who suffered as they did was its own miracle. What a remarkable thing that Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Desmond Tutu and so many should have seen, that we should not hold our oppressor in a place of animus. We should not seek revenge. We should integrate him into the goodness of our life and make him a part of the whole. And here we now sit in America, our 5th year into the dawning of the 21st century, finding ourselves waging a cruel and inhumane, illegal, immoral war in a place that did not attack us. It was something we elected to do. And those of us who found flaw in that idea and resisted it were soon overwhelmed with the machinery of propaganda and the clever deceits of mighty men and women who sat in our government and found these ways in which to lie to the American people and to lead us into this moment of our great conflict and anxiety. If Dr. King were alive today, he would say, let us understand the oppression with as much clarity as we can, and let us come together with all of the tools that are at our disposal and put it in retreat. And I say that anyone who suggests that they sit in a place of dilemma on what to do and the cruelty of the times in which we are facing life, I say to you, go back and read the works of Dr. King. Look at the blueprints that were applied to our liberation. Look at what he did to make this nation whole. And let us go back to those simple instructions and let us begin to re-engage ourselves in a truth that we know exists and fulfill a mission that we already have illustration on how to do it. Recently, like all billions of people in the world, I watched the Olympics in Greece, and I delighted in the remarkable skills expressed by, given us by so many remarkably skilled athletes. And there was one race in particular where America was involved, and there was a special moment of pride and curiosity for me, because it was a race, a relay race, in which the American team was made up of 4 black women. And here were 4 black women going to go and bring home the gold for America, because each one of these women in their individual sport excelled. They'd already won, they'd already set records. And now the 4 of them coming together, it wasn't a matter of whether they won or not. It would be how large would the record be that they set for the new world record. And as I watched with excitement and curiosity, and the rain started, the race started. At the second handoff of the baton, the races faltered. The handoff faltered. And in the stumbling moment, our race was lost. We didn't even qualify, let alone get the medal. And this became, in its most simple design, a symbol of what I think is in part the difficulty that we face today. Somewhere we, the elders, those of us who had the fortune to meet the events of our time in vigorous battle, those of our generation did what we had to do and did it splendidly. You look at the 20th century, it's a remarkable century. One of the most remarkable in all of the centuries of humankind. What a time that was. All that we overcame, all that we did. And still there was, at the end of it all, democracy still had the chance to flourish. And here we were, looking now to the next generation to pick up where we left off and to carry the nation forward. And instead we went into a period of meism, I-ism. Our children inherited the success of our struggle. They did not inherit the essence and the deeper meaning of it. And as a consequence, it was lost to them. They were so busy enjoying the rewards, the material gain. They let the enemy sneak in, and we were co-opted. I say to my friends, because we have a meeting coming up shortly called the Gathering of the Elders, not only for us who were there to re-examine what we had done, but to find out where we were flawed in the handing off of the baton. Where did we make the mistake? And after we had analyzed and clearly understood what our mistakes were, to then reach once again for our youth and say, we challenge you to pick up where we left off. And not only do we challenge you to do it, we will do it once again, to demonstrate to you once again what it is you must do. We will become arrested again, become civilly disobedient again. We will violate the laws that are unjust again. We will be arrested again. We will be put upon again. We will be denounced again. We will be harassed by the FBI and the CIA again. We will be denounced as malcontents again. We will go through it all. Because without that kind of journey, there is going to be no resolve to the problem. If we do not settle in this century the issue of poverty, ignorance, and the oppression of race, we will never live to see the 22nd century. It is mandated that this century find solutions to so many centuries of problems that have been plaguing us and hounding us. And no one is exempt from this journey. Many who never heard of Afghanistan, many who never heard of Iraq or Baghdad, many who never heard of Vietnam in America, those who lived their cushy, middle-class lives removed from all other social reality, soon in very harsh ways came to know these places of foreign wonder. 9/11 happened in New York. It was an awakening for many. And all of a sudden the word terrorism became the catchword. Everything now is around terrorism. When in fact, billions of people have lived every day of their lives in terror, and we cared not. Billions of people suffered from hunger, and we cared not. Billions of people suffered the terror of ignorance, we cared not. Tens of millions suffer HIV/AIDS, and we cared not. And now all of a sudden, we are the new experienced of terror, and we treat it somehow as it has become our exclusive domain. We have just joined the world. And as long as ignorance, hunger, and racism, and ignorance persists, terrorism will have its most powerful yield in where it can recruit its disciples. If we do not eradicate, we may have all the wars we want. We may throw all the weapons we wish. We may kill all the people we can possibly kill. We may even wind up, because the insanity does not end, it continues and multiplies. We may even throw a nuclear device yet again. After all, it was done once before. And incidentally, we were the ones who did it. What is to say that there will not be some justification for doing it yet again by those who are so insane that do the things they do now? We must catch them at this level. And if we do not eradicate these pestilences, these things in our lives, we will never be able to rest easy. There'll be more 9/11s than we'll ever be able to imagine. And there's a world that is so angry. There are people that are so hateful to what we have done to them. There are people who are so upset with us. And in a way, many of them are most upset because of their expectations of us as a democracy, as a people, and what our history has professed to be. Because we have failed to deliver that for them in their struggle for human dignity. They see in us some betrayal. And there's nothing worse for a family than those within the family who betray each other. And now I say to you that if we are to evoke and seriously look upon what Dr. King brought us in our moment of great need, the wisdom of it, and the overwhelming humanity of it, if we are seeking to apply that once again, and we genuinely believe that it is the way we must go, then we cannot talk to it from a place of distance. It is one thing, a black mother tonight at the little gathering at the buffet said to me, Mr. Belafonte, I'm so troubled about my daughter. She's 20 years old, she just don't seem to have any regard for what's going on in the world. She just seems to be on a good time run. And what are we going to do about that? I said, well, you've got to ask yourself. Because what she is doing in the way in which she does it is a reflection of your failure. Somewhere along the line, what you should have done in the counsel of your child, those values and those things to which you should have led her, regardless of your excuses for why you did not. The fact is that the absence of those ingredients helps shape her attitude towards a value system that is unhealthy, shape her attitudes towards a value system that is indifferent, and all the things that you bemoan in her personality and her character. Look to yourself first for what you denied to give her, and perhaps you might find a place from which to begin to move to change it. We cannot just continue to have quote-unquote celebration and come together one day and anoint one another and be delighted by the one or two acts of goodness we see in our community. It is a never-ending task that is all-consuming and must be attended to at every hour of the day. There should be no relief from it. It does not mean that it is a task that does not embrace honor and pleasure and delight and enormous reward. Many of my friends in the arts who are far more successful than I've ever been, who sit with all of the money and the anointing, and how many times you see them on television getting yet another award, and the narcissism of it all, who say to me, gee, too bad you didn't go all the way. You sacrificed so much. And I say, wait a minute. Weep not for me. There was no sacrifice. Let us make some comparisons here. You wake up every morning calling your agent, getting the latest results on the sales of your records, and the box office count on your movie. To fatten the coffers which are already spilling over so vulgarly. I wake up every morning with the possibility of having a conversation with Nelson Mandela, the Kennedy family, talking to Bishop Desmond Tutu, Rabbi Weiss, a couple of friends of mine around the world, and talking to people and students and stuff, and Frank Ferrari. Tell me, who has the better of it? I enjoy where I am. I sacrificed nothing. My life was made full by the Honor Roosevelts, the Dr. Kings, and the neighbors that I've known in the humblest of places. That is what drives me. I do not believe that those who have a mind and a heart and a soul and who are desirous of truth should ever capitulate to consensus. Dr. King said, I'm not a yielder to consensus. I am a consensus maker. And I think we have to be responsible for making the new consensus. Thank you very much for being here.